Well, good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm just a minute getting late. Why don't I try that again? Good morning, everyone. Sorry that I'm just a minute late getting started here this morning, but it is very nice to see that there are people that are currently viewing and do reach out and say hello in the chat. Looks like people are starting to type now, so that's excellent. Yes, good morning all. So today we are going to talk a little bit more about variables and our usage of them. And this might actually be a slightly shorter than average class because on Monday I'm going to start a new topic and I don't really want to start a new topic in the last half of a Friday lecture. So we'll see how much time we actually spend together, but we could certainly use the tail end of the lecture for questions if people would like that. So today, let us talk a bit about identifiers and also why my camera never stays the right size in this program. Okay. Here we are. So we're going to talk a little bit about identifiers. Identifiers are names for things in programming. So before we get there, let's think about writing. So I told you last time that writing code is more like writing English than it is like writing mathematical expressions. So a programming assignment is going to have more in common with an English assignment than it is going to have with a math assignment or a physics assignment, where ultimately you need to demonstrate that you've done some work and got the right answer. Well, in programming, it's going to be more about the writing itself. What is the thing that you produce? So when you're thinking about writing, let me ask you a couple things here. First of all, how do you organize a text? So you're texting a friend. Oh, when someone says good hi from the library, that's nice. It's fantastic that we do have these study spaces on campus where you can watch the remote lecture live synchronously. And actually, I'm going to have a bit more to say about that as we get a little bit further on in the lecture towards the end. However, in the chat in Top Hat, how do you organize a text? Now you might say, well, not very much, or possibly I don't. Right, so someone says you make up the text in your mind. Yep, absolutely. Let's see. Okay, so we might have a text might be organized in paragraphs. Yeah, there we go. So you're going to kind of get your thoughts together and then express them in some way, and the way that you express them might be in paragraphs. For a lot of people, a text might be much shorter than that. It might be organized in sentences. Those sentences may or may not have punctuation. When you're texting somebody, come on, let's be honest. Often it's just a phrase. Sometimes it's just a single word. Actually, I'm a big fan of just sending people a thumbs up emoji. Somebody says something and I think that's a good idea. Yes, you should go ahead and do that. Boom. Settled. That's all we need to say in a lot of cases. Yeah, I'm seeing a thumbs up emoji in the chat. And maybe somebody can put a thumbs up reaction emoji on the thumbs up in the, yeah. Acronyms? Yeah, absolutely. Lots of people use acronyms in text. So we have things that are very short, maybe a single word, maybe a single symbol, where that symbol might be a character derived from our language, ABC, or other characters from lots of languages, or it may be an emoji, something very symbolic like that. How do you organize a letter? If you're writing a letter to somebody, hopefully in this case, it'll be a little bit different. I'm probably not going to write a letter that says, to the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, from Jonathan Anderson at this address, dated January the 28th, 2022. The content of the letter is, respected sir, boom. Just a thumbs up emoji, right? Probably not. Right, so we're going to have an address, we're going to have a salutation. How about the main content of what we're trying to say in the letter? How do we organize that? Although now I do kind of want to write somebody a letter, a big form letter with letterhead and all that stuff. That's just thumbs up emoji. Right, now we're definitely talking about things like paragraphs, sentences, paragraphs, hopefully grammar, punctuation, all of those things. So we have lots of ways that we can try to get content in a letter. How about something like an essay? How do you organize an essay? Someone says start with asking about well-being. Yeah, if you're writing a personal letter to somebody, then absolutely. I hope you're well. I hope you and your family are well. All of that sort of thing. And in fact, we often put those kinds of things in emails because emails are sort of letters, and they can be as formal as like a businessy letter, but an email can also be a little bit less formal. Sometimes these days I have occasion to be emailing with students and they're telling me something about a reason why they can't do this or they can't do that because they can't come to the lab because they've just been exposed to COVID or something like that. And very often I'll have occasion to say something, a very sincere, I hope that you and your family are well, which is not something I'd put in like a business letter, but it's absolutely something I'll put in an email to students, especially when you're telling me about some difficulty that you're having, often pandemic related these days. Okay, so yeah, if you're organizing an essay, then we have a well understood structure of an introduction, which is probably going to be a paragraph. We have a body, which is probably going to be paragraphs. Kind of a classic formulation is an introduction paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion paragraph. It doesn't have to be that. We don't have to be that formulaic. We are allowed to express our creativity in how we organize our writing, but that is one classic structure, and often it's a good one. Somebody pointed out that often we'll have an outline. Yeah, that's true. So if you're writing an essay, then you may need to think about the structure of the essay independently of the individual words that you're saying in each paragraph. You want to say, what is the message I'm trying to convey here? What's the message I'm trying to convey here? And then actually go ahead and convey that message. So now we're definitely going to have sentences. We're going to have paragraphs. Those paragraphs may have headings, section numbers, things like that. How about a report? How do we organize a report in addition to the organization that we would put into an essay? Well, I just hinted at something that we might have in an essay but often don't, but we could, but in a report we would absolutely, definitely have. Yeah, so we're going to want to have a thesis statement for sure. Yeah, headings, that's an important one. So headings, explicit sections, possibly a table of contents depending on how long the report is and how complex it is. So when you write a lab report for us, you're probably not going to write a table of contents if it's not all that long. However, if it's a longer report, if I'm producing a 40-page technical report for a research sponsor detailing all the things that we've done and how we've spent their money really wisely in advanced science and done cool stuff, yeah, there's going to be a table of contents there. Background section, yeah, background section is really important. All right, how about a book? What's a book going to have that a report may not have? Yeah, now we're getting into things like chapters. Now, I should say that a report may not have because some reports are really long and some reports are essentially books, but books definitely, unless we're talking about a kid's book. Now we're really talking about chapters. Sometimes if it's a really big book, there'll be parts. So part 1 has 6 chapters and part 2 is 12 chapters, what have you. Someone says creativity. Yes, a book will probably have a bit more creativity in it than a report, depending on the nature of the book. Hopefully reports are still expressing ourselves a bit, but books, especially works of fiction, are definitely expressing our creativity. Someone says a cover. Yes, that's a fair point. But what I'm really, so yeah, these are all good points that people are making in the chat, but what I'm really getting at the moment is the increased level of structure and organization that has to go into more complex pieces of writing. If you're sending a quick text to a friend, you don't have to think too much about how to organize it all. If I got a text from somebody that said part 1, chapter 1, and then began, I would be a bit concerned that I might be there all day. When I send a quick text to somebody, I'm probably just sending a word, an emoji, a sentence, maybe a couple of sentences at the most. But the more information that needs to be conveyed, the more complex the thought that we wish to communicate, the more structure that we need to add to our writing. So this is true when we are writing in a creative writing course, and this is also true when we are writing in a programming course. So we can organize Python in lots of ways. And this is the names I'm about to show you. Some of them are kind of Python specific, but some of them are very general and used in every programming language. And in other programming languages that don't use exactly the same words for these concepts, they still have the same concepts. So when we are writing text where we might write a phrase, the sort of Python equivalent to that is an expression. So let me switch over to this view, and then of course have to fix my camera size again. So give me an example of an expression. A very simple expression. Just type in the chat. Somebody give me a quick example of an expression. Okay, 2 plus 2. There we go. I type 2 plus 2, I press enter, and look at that. That expression evaluates to something, and the thing it evaluates to is 4. Very good. Or if you listen to Radiohead, then 2 plus 2 equals 5. Maybe Radiohead is a little bit too old of a band reference for this crowd. Ooh, lots of expressions there that people typed in the chat. Very good. So an expression is kind of like a phrase in English. So, and how about sentences? What's the kind of Python equivalent of a sentence that we've seen so far? Previously, we showed you, or we looked at this little Python script, which contains comments. And those comments are things that are really for people and not for the computer. It contains comments, and it contains what? What is this called? Somebody's typing. What is this thing called? Variable name equals expression. Okay, so we're using the input function. Yep. But this is called an assignment statement. So we are using an assignment statement to create a variable. So whatever the variable name is on the left and whatever the expression is on the right. So again, if we go back to Radiohead, then 5 is assigned by 2 plus 2. It's a little confusing, but oh well. We can hold confusing things in our minds and think about them. So here we have now a variable called 5, and it stores the value 4. And this is an assignment statement. So we have seen in programming that statements are things that are kind of like equivalent to sentences in English or in any other language. So a sentence should have a subject and a verb, and often but not always an object. You could say Spot ran, for example. That would be a perfectly valid sentence. And in programming languages, we've seen two kinds of statements thus far. So this is an assignment statement. Variable name is assigned by 2 plus 2, or 5 is equal to 2 plus 2 plus 1. There we go. So that's another assignment statement, which is changing the value held in the variable named 5. And we've also seen another kind of statement, which we didn't really talk very much about, but it's called an expression statement. And an expression statement is what I typed up here. So it is a perfectly valid thing inside of our little Python script here to have a statement which just says 1 plus 1. Now, an expression statement, however, doesn't really do anything. So when I run this code, I haven't told the computer I want to print this value or do anything else with this value. So we evaluate the expression 1 plus 1, and then we're just kind of dropping that value on the floor. But an expression statement can be important because, for example, that's a statement. Print 1 plus 1. So this is going to, when we debug it, we're going to take the expression 1 plus 1 and evaluate it by taking 1 and adding them together, getting 2, pass that as input to the print function. It's going to print out the value 2. And then you'll see that the print function actually evaluates to something. It evaluates to a special value called none, which means nothing. But this, the thing I've highlighted here, print 1 plus 1, that is in fact an expression. So when we print something, that is an expression statement. It is a statement that contains nothing but an expression. So a very simple expression statement would be 1. That's a very, very simple expression. It is also an expression statement. Okay, so we've seen phrases are kind of like expressions, and we've seen that sentences are kind of like statements. Let me ask you a question. And this is not so much a programming question as it is a grammar question. And when I say grammar, I don't mean programming grammar or Python grammar. I mean, I should put my face away here. I mean English grammar. So what do you think? Is that a sentence or not a sentence? All right, I'm getting lots of answers in. I'll give us just a few more seconds. All right, let's close this one in 5, for me, 4, 3, 2, 1, and see if that... There we go. We've got a bunch of answers. Okay, we're kind of evenly split. That's really interesting. Cool. So the answer is no. This is not a complete English sentence. So at the minimum, a sentence in most natural languages, and definitely in English, has to have a subject and a verb. Now you might say, it looks like there's a verb in here, isn't there? Well, if you take a linguistics course, and I would highly, highly recommend it, actually. Linguistics is fascinating, cool stuff. And if you have an opportunity to do that as an elective later, it'd be a great thing to do. I learned a lot in my linguistics course that I took in undergrad. You'll see that this whole phrase, the red car stolen from the rainy vacant street, that whole phrase refers to a thing. This whole phrase is a noun phrase. It refers to the car. Everything else here is descriptive about which car we mean or properties of the car. So red is an adjective that modifies car. So red car is a noun phrase. Rainy and vacant are adjectives that modify street. So rainy vacant street is a noun phrase. But then it turns out the rainy vacant street is also a noun phrase. And the whole thing can be seen as one big noun phrase that refers to an object. How do you know? I could say it instead, and you would know what I'm talking about. So this is not a valid English sentence. Now I could say, the red car stolen from the rainy vacant street drove. Now it's a sentence, not a very compelling one. The red car stolen from the rainy vacant street glistened in the street lamps, in the glow of the street lamps. There we go. So now subject and glistened would be our verb, so that would be a valid English sentence. But what we see here is not a sentence. It is a phrase. So the period at the end is kind of a red herring. So along the way in this programming course, as we learn to get extremely, extremely picky about programming grammar, we may end up learning a few things about we might learn a few things about natural language grammar as well. It's kind of like I never really learned anything about English grammar until I took a French course, and then suddenly I had to learn all this English grammar so that people could describe concepts. Well, maybe we'll have the same thing. So we have phrases are like expressions. Sentences are like statements. We're going to see as we go further into the course more ways to organize our code. And for people who like to have a big picture, global view of where it is we're going, here we go. Paragraphs in a letter or in an essay are kind of like functions. It's a higher level way to organize a bunch of stuff together. So paragraphs are kind of like functions in programming languages. And we've seen how to use functions, we've seen how to call functions, but we haven't seen how to write functions yet. And that's something we will get to before the midterm break, we should. And then we're also going to have things like chapters and parts. So when we get to a book or a report or something like that, we might want to have chapters and parts, something that organizes even larger chunks of information that we want to communicate. Well, similarly, in a programming language like Python, we have things called modules. Now, different programming languages may call these different things, but in Python and in lots of other languages, modules refers to a big chunk of stuff that's related to each other, which we might want to be able to use all at the same time, to gain access to all at the same time. So for example, what are some modules that we have used in this course? So it says, when is our midterm exam? We'll get to functions before the midterm break, not before the midterm exam. But the midterm exams, there are two of them, February 15th and March 15th in the evening, probably 7 p.m., but the room bookings are still being finalized. So I think I mentioned that a few lectures ago. Once we have the room bookings finalized, then I'll put the dates, times, and a seating chart on the course website as well, because the whole reason for doing it in the evening is to be able to spread you out in 2, 3, maybe 4 rooms and keep the numbers down. Right, so math is an example of a module that we've used thus far in the course. So from math import star, when I type this, we're going to see this variables box in Thonny is going to fill right up. Boom. Suddenly there are a whole bunch of names that are available for our use that include things like inf, nan, we talked about nan, not a number, pi, tau, as well as a bunch of functions that have become available. So now we can use the function like the arctan. What is the arctan of 0? The arctan of 0 is 0. What is the arctan of 90? Well, it's something. What is the arctan of the radians of 90? Well, that is 1. Okay. Very good. So we've seen the math module. Another module we've seen? Someone says, how do we get the variable place in Thonny? So in Thonny, under the view menu, and you can't see me clicking on view, unfortunately, it's just off where the crop box is for my video program here. But if you click on the view menu, there are a bunch of different things that you can look at, which includes variables. And also people have asked in the past, what do I do if I close my shell? How do I get it back? The view menu and then shell. There we go. Yeah, so there we go. That's another module that lots and lots of folks have used. Now, some people are going to do their very first lab this afternoon, so maybe you haven't used this yet, but there is a module called NG1020, ENGI 1020, which is a Python module, and that Python module includes other modules. So why is it called ng1020.arduino.api? Well, because there's an ng1020 module, and inside that we have different modules, one of which is called Arduino for interacting with Arduino boards, and within that there's another module called API. There's a bunch of things inside of there, and within that there is a module called API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. So that is kind of like having parts and chapters and sections within, so you have multiple chapters in a part and you have multiple sections within a chapter. That is the kind of hierarchical organization that we can bring to Python code. Now, we're not showing you how to write modules yet, but after the midterm break in the second half of the course, we will. So you'll be able to write a module like NG1020 or like math. You'll be able to create modules and you'll be able to write Python programs that have code living in multiple files instead of just a single Python script. And that is how we can manage the complexity of building larger and larger pieces of software. We can't write a 1,000,000-line Python script and understand it. But there are definitely software projects in this world that have multiple millions of lines of source code. How do they do it? With additional levels of organization, hierarchy, lots of files that contain source code that have relationships to one another. So that's how we manage complexity so that any particular module is something that a person can kind of keep in their head and understand the structure of it. So someone asked, is it a package? So NG1020 is a package that contains a module, but package is kind of a separate thing. We won't really talk about packages right now. Packages is kind of how you distribute programs and how you distribute software to people. So you take a bunch of software and ship it to somebody over the internet, and you package it up and put it in a package and send it to them. And that package in Python will generally contain a module or possibly lots of modules. Okay, so that towards the end of the course, we'll see how we create modules. So this is where we're going. We've seen expressions, we've seen statements. We're going to look at more kinds of statements. In particular, next week, we're going to start looking at if statements so that we can do conditional control flow, so that we can say, if something is true, then I want to do this, and otherwise do that. If it's cold, turn on the heater. If it's too hot, turn on the fan. And if neither of those is true, then don't do anything. We're just right. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be able to do with if statements. And then we're going to see loops. How can we do things over and over and over and over again so that we don't have to run the script, run the script, run the script, run the script? How can we, that seems really tedious and repetitive. Let's get the computer to repeat things for us. So we've seen expression statements, we've seen assignment statements, we're going to see if statements, and we're going to see loops. Once we've done that, then we'll move on to functions and then modules, and then we'll do all kinds of cool stuff. So all of these, well, many of these things, I should say, functions, modules, variables, all of those things have names. So let me see. I'm going to ask you another question in Top Hat here, and there's no right answer to this one. So what names of things have we seen in Python thus far in the course? Where things could be variables, they could be functions, they could be modules. What names have we seen thus far in the course? Okay, we have seen operators. Yep. Well, so I have said that operators are a name for a thing, but I mean, what Python names have you seen me kind of literally type into Thonny here? Like atan would be one example. Okay, so we've seen print, input, yup. We've seen some names like float, yup, that is true. Okay, so somebody said from math import star, yep, the name in there is math. Oops. So math is the name of something. Math is the name of the module. Let's see, nan. Yep, nan is the name of a variable which contains a special value. NG1020. Right. Don't think I can import that in Thonny. I have to, yeah. But anyway, it is something that we've seen. Yep, pi is a name that we've seen. Floor is a name. Input is a name. Input's the name of a function. Floor is the name of a function. Good. So these are some of the newest responses. Let's see if people are liking each other's responses. Yeah, okay. So we've got ceil, which is short for ceiling. So that is a function. So the ceiling of 1.2 is 2, whereas the floor of 1.2 is 1. Yeah, okay, good. We've seen radians and we've seen degrees. Very good. So we've seen lots of different names for things. Now we might reasonably ask ourselves, well, what is a valid name for something? So we've seen lots of names. What did all those names seem to have in common? Just type in the Top Hat chat. What kinds of commonalities were there among those names? All right, they had letters. Yep. Yeah, they did seem to mostly be in lowercase, didn't they? That's true. Not all names have to be, but they did mostly seem to be in lowercase, and that is a kind of a common convention. We'll talk about that in a middle. We saw some single words without spaces. Yep. They tended to be short. Yeah, that's a good observation. So even to the point of we didn't want to type the word ceiling, so we typed seal. So the function is called seal, which is short for ceiling. str is short for string. Bool is short for boolean. Yep, that's true. Underscores. Yes, indeed. We did see underscores in those names. Okay, so these are some good observations. So we've seen lots of names thus far. What are the rules for something that makes a valid name in Python? So in Python, a valid name is called an identifier. An identifier because it identifies something. It may identify a variable, it may identify a function, it may identify a module. And valid identifiers, there are very, very simple rules for what constitutes a valid identifier. So a valid identifier includes letters, numbers, and underscores. So as we've seen, no spaces. If we had, let's see. So I can define a variable called x. I can define a variable called x is the coolest number. I can also create a variable called x is the best. Or in fact, if I wanted to run it all together, x is the best without any way of distinguishing between the different words. Typically, people will choose one or the other. You'll either have underscores that take the place of spaces, or you'll do this thing called Camel Case, because it looks like a camel, because it's got humps on its back. So you'll typically either have underscores or this Camel Case. It is possible to have a variable with all uppercase or just some uppercase. But by convention, people typically, at the very least, start their variable names or their function names or their module names with lowercase. And in Python, actually, people are kind of encouraged by convention to use underscores rather than camel case. That is different in different programming languages. And this is one of these interesting things where syntactically, the grammar of the language will let you use uppercase letters and do the camel case thing if you want to, but it's kind of the convention and it is encouraged. And in fact, it's a Python standard that says people really ought to use underscores in their names instead, but it's not a rule in the language. It's a convention that people are encouraged to follow. So these are all valid names, and we have underscores, and those are okay. We can have letters, numbers, and underscores, so we can have numbers in there too. So if I want to say x0, for example, and I also want to have an x1. Oops. So what's going to happen when I press enter here? So I've typed x space 1 equals 1. I didn't mean to type that. When I press enter, what's going to happen? People are typing, yeah, we're going to get an error. That's right. So x1 equals 1. That's fine, but no spaces. A variable name, a function name, a module name can have letters, numbers, and underscores, but they cannot have spaces. We cannot have punctuation. We cannot have, let's see. Yeah. We cannot have, sorry, I just saw, I didn't turn off notifications, and I just saw a text message that came up about a power outage, but not here. Actually, my lights didn't work in my office for 24 hours, but they're back on now, so hooray. Otherwise, I'd be very, very backlit. So we cannot have punctuation. We also cannot start our identifiers with a number. So too cool for school. That is not a valid identifier. So the syntax, the syntactic language, the grammar of the language won't let you write an identifier that starts with a number or any other punctuation. So no parentheses, no brackets, no quotation marks, no periods. So later when we get to modules, we'll talk about what it means to ng1020.arduino.api. But for now, I'll just say that this part is a valid identifier. This part is a valid identifier. This part is a valid identifier. And those three identifiers are working together. And the dot is actually an operator that helps us look up stuff inside of other things. But NG1020 is a valid identifier. So NG1020 equals the best. But 1020 engineering and 1020 NG is wrong. So you see 1020 NG is an invalid identifier. Now, so far I have said letters, but not been too specific about what that means. So in Python version 2, which is a version that is kind of now deprecated. So on most computers now, when you install Python, you're going to get Python 3. Python 2 is no longer supported, and that's really good news for a couple of reasons. There aren't a lot of differences, but there are some important ones. One thing about Python 2 is its identifiers that it considered to be valid letters were the letter A through Z, capital A through Z, so lowercase a through Z, capital A through Z, and that was it. Those are the only valid letters. In Python 3, we have a bit more flexibility. So one thing that Python 3 does is identifiers can now encompass a lot of Unicode characters. And Unicode is a standard for representing characters from all kinds of languages. So in Python 2, I could write something like greeting equals hello. But I couldn't write something like, and I'm not going to type this, I'm going to copy and paste it because I'm not sure how to type this on the keyboard that I have, but ni hao is equal to a Mandarin version of hello. And I think the written, it's actually the same in Mandarin and Cantonese, but in Cantonese they pronounce it differently. It's like lai or something. We've had people in the course who said they speak Hindi, so we can have a variable called namaste. Cool. We can have a variable from Bengali, which also uses the Devanagari script. Oops. Equals hello. So you see now I have in my variable list got lots of variables, some of which have come from different languages, different scripts, not just from English. We can also do this with, so here's some Urdu, and I'm going to do something a bit funny here. I'm going to type in hello because hello, and then I'm going to paste the Urdu for hello, hilo, I think it's pronounced in, and you'll notice that my Python interpreter is behaving a bit funny when I do this, and that's because Urdu is an example of a language that is written from right to left rather than left to right. So when I try to type it in, the computer does get a little bit confused because I guess my computer's input language doesn't really understand right to left very well, but that's okay. We can also say marhaban. There we go. We could also say, here's another example of a right to left language. Shalom. So there we go. So you see, we've got variables in lots and lots of languages, and we can use lots of different language names. So Python 3 is much more inclusive of different languages because, newsflash, not everyone in the world uses English as their first language, which was a bit of a newsflash to some of the people who came up with programming languages in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Oh, someone says we don't have any hello in Bengali. Oh, okay. Well, this is just what Google Translate was able to tell me. So, all right. Thank you for correcting me. I will definitely not forget that. So in Python 3, we have lots of different characters that we can use. And so Unicode is a standard that describes ways to represent all kinds of characters. It's also true, by the way, in Python that we can have lots of these different characters inside of a string. So whereas in Python 2, it was kind of hard to represent namaste, in Python 3, it's really easy. However, you will notice that because Python was originally written I guess primarily by people who speak English, and also in a way, as a way of trying to have some kind of a common language, a lingua franca, as it were, though not French. All of the names in standard libraries that come with Python are derived from English words. And it is important when you are writing code to be thinking about the other people who are going to be reading the code. So it may very well be that it makes sense if you're working for one company and that company's in a particular country and everyone speaks the same language, it might make sense to use variable names from that language. On the other hand, there are other circumstances in which you have people from lots of countries and lots of cultures who speak lots of languages who need to be able to work together, and in that case, generally, I'm not saying don't use these kinds of variable names. It's very cool that Python can support variable names from lots of cultures. However, you do want to think about who else will be reading this code, and we want to make sure that things are kind of understandable for the people who are reading it, which is the same motivation for why we have comments in programming. Okay. All right. Any other questions about that stuff? So we have valid names and we have invalid names. So let me ask you, which of these identifiers that I'm about to show you are in fact syntactically valid? So some of these are valid in Python and some are not. All right, some answers starting to come in. Give you just a minute or so. Oh, someone said, can you scroll up to the question again? The question is, which of these identifiers is syntactically valid in Python 3, the version of Python that we are using? Another important difference that you might be interested in between Python 2 and Python 3 is when you divide two integers, so 1 divided by 3, we've seen that in Python 3 that gives you 0.333333. In Python 2, it actually had integer division be the default, and you had to ask for floating point division, whereas in Python 3, it's the other way around. 1 divided by 3 is what you would think it is in mathematics, and you have to ask for integer division. All right, so lots of folks have answered, so I'm going to close this in just a few seconds. Let's call it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so lots of folks said that this NG1020 is not valid, and that's correct because it has a space in it. Underscore user underscore name, we had only 50 people thought it was valid. It is, in fact, a valid identifier. It's a valid identifier because it contains letters, underscores. It doesn't have numbers, but it could. It doesn't start with a number, so it's actually valid. There are some folks who think it's probably a bad idea to start a variable name with an underscore just by like convention. That's sort of left over from their experience with other programming languages where, like in C, it's very strongly discouraged from having variable names that start with underscores for reasons that we don't need to get into. In Python, that's less of a strong thing. I probably wouldn't name a lot of variables that start with an underscore, but you can. Greeting, yep, definitely allowed. Let's see, this one is namaste. Yep, that one is definitely allowed. Hola. So, hola, if it were just the H-O-L-A, even if it starts with a capital H, that would be perfectly acceptable, but no punctuation in identifiers. Programming is for you. Yep, that is definitely allowed. 7 is not allowed because it starts with a number, and I is definitely allowed. In fact, I is something we're going to see a lot of. So Oops. I have to go back and edit this question because I checked the wrong box. So E is definitely, so you were right. E is not a valid identifier. F is a valid identifier, and I is a valid identifier too. Apparently my check boxes of which ones were right and which ones are wrong was slightly incorrect. Sorry, I'll fix that. Okay, so that is it for talking about identifiers. However, now this is probably a good moment to talk about something else. So next week, there are going to be some changes. The changes are actually not going to be huge in this course because we have more than 100 people in the course. So we're not going to all go back to a lecture theater. The labs may change a little bit. We're still working through some of the details. We may start to put people with partners, or we may continue to just have you do the labs individually. We're still working through some of the details, but we still have in-person labs. We had in-person labs this week. We're going to have in-person labs next week. The lectures are going to continue to be delivered remotely, so I'm going to stand here in my office and talk to you via a camera instead of standing in front of you in a room, which continues to be kind of sad for me because it makes it harder for me to understand how well you understand things, which is part of what makes Top Hat so important right now, because otherwise I would have no idea whether you're really getting what I'm talking about or not. Do please continue to engage in the Top Hat chat, etc. That would be super. But it looks like we are going to be able to do the thing where we open up Ian 2006, which is the room that we are scheduled to have our lectures in, and use it as a place for you to watch our lecture. So there are different study rooms on campus where you can go and put in your headphones and watch your remote lecture while someone next to you is watching a remote lecture for 1010 or a different course. But it looks like we'll probably also be able to do a thing where we open up EN 2006, and since that's the room that we were supposed to be in for our lectures, actually we'll just have somebody go to the front of the room and turn on this YouTube stream and use the speakers in the room, so you won't have to put your headphones in, and everybody in the room who's there will all be listening to 1020 together. So it would be, it looks like we're probably going to be able to do that, but we can't have more than 100 people at a time. Now, last time it looked like there might only be 40-something people who need that. In this case, we're going to say if that were offered and if it's available, I really want to understand which of these describe you. And you can pick multiple options here, but it would be really, really helpful for us to know for our planning purposes how many people intend to come on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, use other rooms, probably just not avail of the service because you're not going to be on campus, or you would rather not do this because you're really trying to stay away from groups of 40 people or so. Okay, let's see. There's a question here. Exercise 2 in Gradescope has an error. It's set to 2021. Oops, sorry. I thought I fixed that, but maybe I didn't upload the new fixed version to Gradescope. So I will fix that. Thank you for pointing it out. 2022, yeah. Okay, so yep. Thank you very much for pointing that out, and I definitely will fix that. Let's see. Would the questions be opened later? Yes, they will. Oh, sorry. There was a question earlier. Why is E not valid? I forget what E was, but I did have. I think I mentioned as we were reviewing the answers, well, I said which ones were right and not right, and it looks like I checked a couple of the boxes wrong. I think what happened was I made up the question, and then I said, no, let's change the order of those, but some of the old tick boxes got left checked or unchecked, so I will fix that. Okay, so lots of people asking questions, and answering the question, and I will open this up as homework so that you can do it later. But for now, let's have a look at what people said because I'm very, very curious. Okay. Good. So, it looks like we're not going to have any problems then. So definitely fewer than 100 people. So if you come to Ian 2006 on Monday at 11 o'clock, we'll make sure that, it's a huge room. So there will definitely be room for people to spread out and be physically distanced, etc. Do familiarize yourself with between now and Monday, do familiarize yourself with the new mask requirements. So we now have a minimum standard of, if you're going to wear a cloth mask, it has to be 3 layers. We kind of recommend that people go for an N95 or equivalent, but it's not required. But there are some new mask requirements. You can't bring food or drink into the lecture theater and like pull your mask down while you sip your coffee or whatever. That's not allowed anymore. It was previously, although I don't think you're allowed to bring food and drink into 2006 anyway. But do familiarize yourself with those things so that we can make sure that we are keeping each other safe and also staying on the right side of all the regulations, etc. Okay. Someone says, if you already submitted exercise 2, will I have to resubmit? No. So when I fix the auto grader, I will also make sure that it is rerun against all of the submissions that are already uploaded. Okay. So that's it for today. Any other questions? Oh, is there a sample logbook? I believe that we have a sample logbook entry, but I'm gonna, after this and after my next lecture and tonight, I guess, after a bunch of things that take me to 5 and then beyond and beyond. Anyway, at some point I'll be chatting with the lab instructor and we'll make sure that that sample logbook entry gets uploaded. I believe that it exists, but I'll check with her and make sure that, someone said it's there now. Fantastic. Good. Okay, so I'm not hearing a lot of other questions, so I hope everybody has a really great rest of your day, and I will get to see some of you at 2 o'clock for just a few minutes between a lecture and another meeting, but I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And don't forget, and I should also say, on the course website, we also have exercises, and exercise 2 is available, and that's going to be due on Monday. So I guess that's it. So everybody, I hope you have a really nice rest of your day. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email.